Here we are again. I'm going to continue talking about globalization. It's very blustery and windy and rainy. If you hear strange noises, that's what you might be hearing around my discussion today. So, question: what historical shifts give rise to contemporary globalization? Hopefully the readings are starting to help you think about this, but there's other things maybe I can help to have you think about with these next thoughts. First off, the mobility of capital, people, commodities, images, and ideologies certainly are shifting through time and through technology and new inventions. International communications and technologies, the ways in which we can communicate around the world, has really shifted in the 20th and into the 21st century in such an extreme way. There's an increased ease of transportation. I want you to realize that it hasn't been so long that we could fly planes or go to the moon or even take a train or a car. So much has changed in just such a short amount of time. Deregulation and the outsourcing of labor from developed to developing nations is really a big part of this discussion as well. So take that into consideration. Migration of populations from rural to urban areas and from developing to developed nations. This is something that has been happening, of course, for years, and definitely more so with the Industrial Revolution in full form in the last few hundred years, and continues to be developing now. Increased standardization of goods, tastes, and everyday practices. So I'm going to review a few things, some notes that I took when I read the A World in Motion article, and hopefully you have read it by now. And of course, you'll be answering a few questions related to it. One of the main ideas I think I took away from it is that we live in an interconnected world, one where the rapid flow of capital, people, goods, images, and ideologies draw more and more of the globe into the webs of interconnection. They compress our sense of time and space and make the world feel smaller and distances shorter. And this is the world of globalization and a world in motion. Transportation and communication, as well as innovations in technology, make it easier and quicker for people and things to get around. But this isn't the case everywhere, and that's something to be always aware of as we talk about things in this course. We live in a very convenient westernized society, and that is not true of everywhere, though it is becoming more and more accessible to more places throughout the globe. The question is, do these transportation systems and communication systems always do the right things in every community? So globalization is fundamental reordering of time and space. And I want you to think about that. I want you to explain it to yourself and really kind of delve into that idea. What does this mean? And I really found that the discussion in this article about Fordism got me thinking a great deal about this car and this industry and how it really took our world by storm during the 20th century. And if we think about the fact that we had people working on these lines to produce cars, that this system of mass production, it was so successful that eventually cars were being overproduced and there was too many cars, or if we take it out of the realm of Ford cars, too much stuff being produced. And so this led to people being laid off, the market being saturated, not enough consumers. So Fordism was really a wonderful system that after a while became a problematic system. And so we have actually entered a post-Fordist regime. And the results of that are that we have a flexible relationship with labor practices, markets, products, patterns of consumption that now we outsource to other places in other countries. We use subcontractors temp employees, seasonal workers. So there's more malleable production arrangements within our system rather than it staying the same, on the same track with the same person doing the same job every time. And over time, we've learned through looking at this subject that time is annihilating space. The world today is really this interesting implosion of space and a speed up of all facets in economics and in social life. And another thing to think about is how have social interactions changed in this type of a time that we live in now, with such a change in time and space. Speaking of Ford, I'm standing here in front of a 56 Ford Fairlane with my husband in Cuba, outside of Havana. We went to visit Cuba in 2018. My goal was to see Cuba before it turned into a capitalist country. I was a little too late, but still some of the concepts that were laid there in the 50s continue to reside, but there is definitely a capitalist undercurrent, and it was a very interesting place to visit. So meanwhile, here we are in front of this Ford Fairlane, gorgeous car, had been fixed up. We drove 3 hours out into the country to visit a plantation. If you're familiar with Cuba, you would know that this is a space that became a communist country during a time when the United States then dropped any sense of trade and relationship with Cuba, as well as other places. And so when Cuba sort of was closed off from the world, it did well with the things it had. And so when you go to Cuba, you sort of see this sort of closed sense of the 50s living through some of the objects that you see, the cars that you drive, these beautiful Fords and other cars of the 50s and 60s roam the streets. And the notion that trade was not going in and out of Cuba meant that they had to make do with the things they had. They farmed their own lands. They made their own food. They didn't have a McDonald's come into every corner. So it's a very unique place in that it doesn't have the globalized properties that we see in many other parts of the world, at least not yet. And I say that because I wanted to see it before it had changed. Like I said, there were the beginnings of Airbnb happening as we were there. I had hoped to see Cuba before Starbucks arrived. And unfortunately, on the last day of being in Havana, I saw a sign for Starbucks coffee in a little coffee shop in Havana. So people there are making money. They're hustling. They are bringing goods in. It's just a very interesting system. One more time back to this car. I was scared to death that we were driving this 1956 car 3 hours out. Our driver had a smartphone that he laid on the seat next to him, and on that smartphone he was reading the odometer. Essentially all of the aspects of his car were read through a smartphone because his odometer was long shot from long ago. And the other interesting thing we learned about this car is that it has a Toyota engine. So these are clever people who are working within the system, getting items outside of Cuba brought in, but still keeping the facade of this old style, perhaps because it's attractive to tourists. So there's a very interesting tourist influence there. So back to the article. I want to talk about a few of the terms that you see, and I'm not going to give you all the answers, but they're things to consider. In globalization, there are certainly processes that impact the ways in which cultural products are produced and how they're consumed. And I wanted you to think about what those processes are. One of the things mentioned in the article is deterritorialization of culture. we can maybe think of this as traditionally cultures are viewed as being linked to and united by physical location or territory. Through globalization, that is being broken. Contemporary globalization has dislodged culture from territory. It has deterritorialized the world and different cultures and spaces. This results in people reconfiguring culture in terms of new space, time, context. And this new word, re-territorialization, comes into play. Globalization has radically pulled culture apart from place, travel, communications, commerce, and trade. In fact, we really are a world of culture in motion. We have been unhinged from particular localities, particularly in our time of the smartphone and digital technology. And oftentimes objects and subjects are lifted from their fixed spatial locations and relocated into new cultural settings. I wanted to remind you of the Project Moreno that was created in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, and how this was then recreated in the Venice Biennale. We'll start here next time.